there, but just kind of ignore it. Good evening. I'm Barbara Tinnerman Cecil, and on behalf of Susie Spittler and Tom Beck, I want to welcome you to the 23rd Oral History Taping. Today is Thursday, October 3rd, 2013, and tonight we will hear from our heroic West Milton Fire Department. These courageous volunteers will tell us about their experiences, their personal stories, and how firefighting has changed through the years. We owe these and other firefighters our deepest gratitude for risking their lives to serve, help, and save others. Our first speaker is Bill J. Bill.
Good evening. Back in the 30s, we had two trucks, two International 1931 fire trucks, one city and one rural. And naturally, all the firemen couldn't get on the truck, so we would, most of them would drive their private cars to the fire. Well, I had two neighbors, Harold Stickle and Walter Barnhart, lived across the street, and my dad was on the fire department. My uncle was fire chief, and I had a first cousin that was on the fire department too, so there was a lot of J's on the fire department. And my brother and I learned at an early age, probably, I think I was about 8 and he was 6, that we would, if we'd run and get in the back seat of whose ever car was sitting out in front, we'd get to go to the fire. Well, then when we get to the fire, we didn't have a tanker, so if they didn't have a water source on their property, you could just about say that the building was going to go down, or we had like maybe 500 gallon on the truck, and that didn't go very far. So the firefighters would run into the barn if the barn was on fire and get the cattle out. And if it was a house, they'd go in and start carrying furniture out, and they'd hand the red line, which was a little larger than a garden hose, to me and my brother, and we would wet the roofs down on buildings that was adjacent to the one that was on fire. And so all through high school and everything, I went to fires, and when I graduated from high school, you had to be 21 to get on the fire department. And so I wasn't old enough, but I've been running on fires and everything from all the incidents that we had and everything. And didn't seem like we had too many automobile accidents back then, but we had a lot of grass fires and house fires. Back in the 30s and early 40s, we had a lot of wood shingle roofs, and you had more roof fires than what we do today. But anyway, when I graduated, like I said, you had to be 21 to get on the fire department. Well, Uncle Sam drafted me in 1951 for the Korean conflict. So when I got out of the service, then I was old enough to get on the West Milton Fire Department legally. Probably the biggest fire I ever fought was when the Troy bulk plant caught on fire, and we went over to Troy and mutual aid. All of our regular firemen, they put in a Troy fire station. And then they called back and wanted our rural truck. And I remember Ed Hemrick and Ivan Kingery and my dad and my brother and I went over, and they put us right on the fire ground. And it was across the street there from where the Troy Lumber Company used to be. And the railroad track run right to the south of this property. But the ground was shaking, and there was like 5 trucks like Wilson has that was on fire, and the jets on them was the air, so that the tanks wouldn't blow up. They was screaming like train whistles, and there was 55-gallon drums that just kept blowing up that was along the fence row, and the sales office was on fire too. And I remember Ivan took a hose and went inside the sales office, but a Troy fireman crawled up beside Devon and I and pulled a piece of galvanized metal that was on the roof of the loading station over in front of us, and we put a Keenan loop in the hose. He said, "Now you boys keep that on that big tank there in front of you, because it's full of JP4 aviation fuel. And if that goes, this whole end of Troy is going to go." And Troy had about 5 houses on fire to the east of this property. And it just seemed like the ground was shaking, and we didn't even have time to think about what would happen if anything would, one of them big tanks would blow. But those 55-gallon drums kept blowing up. It was along the fence row. And we didn't even have fire gear, just our school jackets on. And it was really something. It was in the late 40s when that, I should have called Troy News and found out what year it was. But finally, a fireman from Dayton and one from Covington crawled up beside us, and they had gear on, and they said, "We're going to relieve you guys." And I remember when I got home, my mother said, "You know, if that tank would have blowed," she said, "I'd have lost my husband and my 2 sons." But I didn't even think about that. But she just threw all our clothes in the trash because it was oil soaked and everything. But that was one of my memorable occasions. I'll pass it on to Fuzzy.
Well, I got on the fire department in 1962, and the biggest change I can see in the fire department now is safety equipment, their gas masks. When I got on the department only had 3 gas masks for 29 members. Now then they have one for every man that gets on the fire truck. And you're not allowed to ride on the back or on the side of a fire truck anymore. So that takes care of all that. And in 1975, the fire department started running squad for Union Township. And I was running squad with them till 77. But in the meantime, we was fighting a fire on mutual aid with Lewisburg. And as I got out there fighting that fire, and I walked around the side of the building, and somebody hit the window in the house with a stream of water, and it caused the window to break, and it threw a piece of glass out and caught me in the eye. Well, I stayed there and worked on top of the house for, probably 45 minutes. Then it started hurting, so I got down and had one of the boys that took fire training, or paramedics, to look at it, and he said there was something wrong with it, but he didn't know what. So the chief told him to take me to the hospital and get it checked out. Well, we rode from the fire to the firehouse in the chief's station wagon. And then there they transferred me over into the ambulance. And that was the first time that the ambulance was ever put in service. So I was the first casualty that rode in the ambulance. So then got back onto that, and then got to going out on fires again, and got to the point where I was kind of getting scared to go into a burning building. So I asked the chief if it'd be all right if I retired and got off the department because I was scared to go in a burning building anymore. So now I'll turn it over to Bob Adams.
My name's Bob Adams. I got on in 1973, and the biggest thing I can see that changed or has went on since I've been on is like what Clarence was saying. We only had so many air masks to go around, and most of those stayed in the truck. We never bothered getting them off. They were in cases. But I showed a little interest in the fire department when I got on in 73. Clarence signed my application here, and back then, we didn't go through fire school like the newer guys do now. That's one thing I will say for nowadays. Our guys are very well trained, which all along we've been well trained, but we did most of it, like when I got on, in-house. Clarence signed my application. He was in charge of me. He's the one that made sure I did all my book work and everything to learn the fire service and everything. So that's one thing I want to thank Clarence for over the years, taking me under his wing here after that. One of the, I guess some of the bigger fires I've been on has just been recently when we had the grocery store over here and the place up on Hamilton Street. Those have been about the biggest fires I've been on. Been on quite a few over the years. We've had quite a few fires downtown in different places. The one thing I never did on the fire department, I guess because it didn't interest me at the time, I didn't run squad like Clarence and some of them did. That was just not my thing. I'd rather be in a burning building than in the back of the squad. That just, that didn't interest me. So, well, I'll turn it over to Denny Frantz.
Okay, I got on in '69, and like Bill said earlier, that you had to be 21 to get on the fire department. Well, they changed the ruling, Constitution bylaws, and I was the first firefighter to get on under the age of 21, and I believe at the time I was 19, just out of high school. I assume the reason I enjoyed the fire department or thought about the fire department is because my dad was on for 20-some years, so it just kind of, I guess, got into the blood, and I've been on now for 45 years. When I first got on, we had rubber raincoats and rubber boots, and can't remember if they were plastic or fiberglass helmets. But the gear nowadays, I mean, you can take a lot of heat before you feel it. But let me tell you, with rubber fire coat and rubber boots, you could feel the heat very easily and quickly. I remember we had a training fire at Lowry Farm. We were burning the house. It was Central Western. And I was probably 200-300 feet away from it. And my boots got so hot, I took the hose and just filled my boots up with water because I felt like they were just on fire. And like Bob said, I think the biggest fires that I've had which were like a month apart, was Mr. Deal's and on Hamilton Street, the old Valor building, which used to be the old lumber yard. So those were both, and they were like a month apart, you know. And I said, I hope we don't ever have to go through that again. But we had 29 members. Since then, we've changed Constitution bylaws, and we're now carrying 35 members on the department. So we've upped our roster, and West Milton is very fortunate to have the people interested in becoming firefighters, because we may get 2 or 3, but within no time at all, we're back up to full roster. We've had several applications come in that we said, you know, we're full. We've already got 3 or 4 applications ahead of you. So a lot of departments have a hard time getting volunteers, but West Milton seems to be very fortunate in getting the volunteers. And the guys, I mean, you can't get any better guys than what I have underneath to fight fires, and the natural fry waffles. You know, that's the first thing we tell an applicant. You got to learn how to fry waffles, become a firefighter. So if
If you don't know how to fry a waffle, you don't become a firefighter. But the equipment's changed. I mean, I think first new truck that West Milton, the fire company, bought when I got on cost $63,000. Our last new truck engine was $230, $240, and our rescue truck was even more than that. I don't even want to say what that cost. But the equipment, Total Fire, Morning Pride, I mean, they were out front leaders in getting the best gear. And we try to get the guys the best gear that we can get for them, because, you know, they're risking their life, and what's a few bucks more to get the best to ensure that they come home that night. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Smith. This is Bill Grillia.
Well, compared to everybody else we've heard from thus far, I'm the new kid on the block. I've only been on 31 years. I got on in 1982. We were just married a couple years, and we bought a couple acres out on Range Line Road. I'll never forget my first encounter with the fire department. Got the kids in the back of the car, coming home from work, wife's there, Mary, and what's those red lights up the street? You know, we're going to turn into our driveway. So it must be an accident or something. So we pull on up there, and here the fire department is there, and you had a big barn fire. And so I got out and looked around. It was really interesting. Tony Hughes just came right up, started talking to me like I have known him for all my life. And I can still remember Joe Fronstenny's dad was out there with a hose line. He was chief of the department in a hose line, saying, I don't get a chance to do this very often. So he was out there putting water on the fire, on this barn fire. And Tony says, well, hey, if you're interested, why don't you come Thursday night to the meeting? And so, you know, well, okay. And I did, and well, the rest is history. Here I am 31 years later. I had another perspective, more of a broad, general, national type of view of things, in that I was involved in the fire industry. I was with a company that manufactured protective equipment for firefighters and sold to some of the largest fire departments in the United States and around the world, actually. And I was so proud of West Milton. They were always on the cutting edge. When I got on in 1982, like they've said, I mean, we had long coats and rubber boots. Soon after that, probably 83 or maybe 84, we went into bunker pants. To give you some idea of how cutting edge West Milton is, that's required gear now, the bunker pants, as opposed to the old pull-up boots. New York City, the largest fire department in the world, didn't get out of the pull-up boots and go to the bunker pants until 1994. I mean, from the early 80s, 83, 84, New York City, 94. I mean, we were cutting edge. I was so proud that West Milton was always on the cutting edge of safety. Riding the tailboards of the truck, you know, we'd hang on. There's nothing to hold you on except your hands. In the wintertime, they got cold. You're holding onto the bar. Today, you're in a fully enclosed cab, belted in, strapped in, just like you would be in your automobile. Tremendous advances in safety. And the gear today versus then is, as they've said before, is phenomenal. And it does allow you to get into the fire a little bit deeper. You can get in faster. Gives you a chance to get to the seat of the fire and put water on it. So you're putting out a smaller fire. It hasn't had a chance to spread. So the gear is not just safety, it also helps you save life and property. I mean, the further you can go in, the faster you can get it out, the less damage there is, and the better chance you have of saving the people involved in that fire. So I just want to say that I was extremely proud of West Milton and the forward thinking that they've always showed in equipment, in training, all the way through the years. It's always been that way, cutting edge. And I'll turn it over to Todd Lakes.
Thanks, Bill. My name's Todd Lakes. I got on the fire department in 1988. I would just, first thing I'm going to do is thank all these gentlemen here for the wonderful job they've did over the years and just setting the groundwork for the way the department is today. Excuse me. Secondly, I'd like to Thank my wife and family for the sacrifices they've made over the years. The missed dinners, birthday parties, Christmas, stuff like that. So, thank you. There's some guys that's not here that should be mentioned is Dave Mott and Merle Martin. They were good influences on the fire department. Ivan Kingery is another one. I can remember coming down on a fire run on a Friday night. The guys were frying waffles. Of course, they would make the trucks and go out first, and then Ivan would catch us and make us fry waffles in their place. So that always stunk, but you always tried to get down there quick on Friday nights. As far as the way things have changed over the years, just the safety aspect of it, like the Bill was saying, the gear is so much better. We can stay in longer, which is almost a problem. You can't feel how hot you're actually getting. So there's stuff we have to watch out for, flashovers, backdrafts, and stuff like that. When it gets so hot, sometimes you just can't feel it. There's a lot of training these days for actual self-rescue. If you're trapped in a room that's and you can't get out, they were teaching us to break bridge walls, break through walls, bail out windows, anything to save your own. A couple of like the guys were saying, the biggest fires I've been on was Mr. Deal's. I was up close and personal with that fire. People ask me, what can burn in a grocery store? Everything. Everything from fluorescent light bulbs to pickle jars were exploding all over our heads. So it was rather intense, to say the least. The fire up on Hamilton, that was probably one of the coldest fires I hope to ever be on. We were spraying water, this is coming out of the north, and just freezing to our gear. I mean, we had to go to Don Buckingham's dad's house, can't think of his name, but he had a kerosene heater in his garage, and that's how we got our bunker pants and gear off. We had to wait for it to melt. Then we could take it off and try to warm up. So that's about all I can think of saying. Ben Heron, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Todd. I got on the fire department back in 1985. I feel like I was really lucky when I got on because we had a tremendously strong corps of what I would consider veteran firefighters at the time. I came on with a class of 6, which us 6 were known as we called each other the class of 85. Unfortunately, there's only 2 of us left from that class. One of them happens to be our assistant chief. One of them was a lieutenant at one time. So I like to think of it as a good class that came in. And they actually made an exception for our class. We were so large that I actually was named a reserve sub, which there really wasn't a position called a reserve sub, but they made one so that 2 of us could actually stay. And I really thanked for that because, had I been dropped down, who knows what would have happened if I would have, found another avenue. I'll never know, but I appreciated that. So I was a reserve sub, and the thing that's kind of unusual about that is from reserve sub to captain, I've held every position in between since 1985, and I tried to remember today how long I've actually been captain, and I'm thinking 15 to 17 year range, somewhere there and thereabouts. Why did I join? Because as a young kid, like a lot of young kids, I had the desire to be a firefighter. A lot of people say I want to be a fireman when I grow up. Well, I kind of kept that dream alive, I guess. I did want to do it full-time at one time and took some testing and did well. Unfortunately, I was blind as a bat. And the only way they could fix your eyesight at that time was with a knife, and it wasn't something that I found to be a good idea. In hindsight, I'm glad it worked out that way because I think doing it as a career, I would have probably been done by now. Doing it as a volunteer, for me, it's a lot more rewarding. What's kept me going for the 30 years? Simply helping people. It's the brotherhood in the fire department. If you're outside of the fire department looking in, it's hard to realize how close we become. You just, when you're with someone and you know that you're depending on them to go home, it just creates a bond that it's kind of hard to explain. Kind of like you hear about from the military, but we just happen to do it in our community, not abroad. Basically, I've enjoyed seeing the advancements that they spoke of in the fire service. Quick funny story was, I remember when I got on in '85, our quartermaster said, "We have a pair of pants that I think will fit you, or you can have boots." And I remember saying, "I will take the pants, please." So we still had a couple guys that chose to wear the boots on their own, but like the gentleman before me said, we did have, at that time we were already being extremely progressive. I did not really like the steel tanks that they had back that Bill and Fuzzy and Bobby and Denny were talking about. They weighed a lot of, and I remember wearing one for maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time, and then going home and even as a young person and not being able to move very well. Thermal imaging is another advancement since I've come around, that now you can go into a fire fully geared, fully protected, and actually see where you're going. I mean, if somebody would have told Bill when he got on, or frankly even me when I got on, that, hey, we're going to come out with something that you'll be able to see where you're going, you know, we would have laughed. But it's incredible how far we've come. I know we can think, we usually get the military stuff once they had moved on to something better, so the military gave us thermal imaging. And I remember testing some thermal imaging for Bill's company. Bill modified a thermal imager that we can actually put on our helmet, so we have total hand movement. All we do is look through an eyepiece, and I remember doing some prototypes for Bill. I think I might have melded one, unfortunately, and I apologize for that. I would say the high points in my career, when people call 911, they're probably experiencing either one of or the worst event that's going to happen in their life. And when we respond, there's something that's comforting to them, that they know that somebody is there to help them. And it's nice to be able to help them in that situation. It's something that they're going to remember. And the people that are coming in West Milton, you know, they might know who that person is, so you already have a bond with these people. Probably the lower points of the firefighting career, and I know Bill and everybody that's been on as many years as me and much, much longer can tell you that, number one, losing your mentors. Devon J. was actually my first chief. Devon since has passed, Bill's brother. And Denny took over chief right after Devon, so I've had the luck of serving under 2 excellent fire chiefs, number one. So that's helped me tremendously. And Denny, as an officer, Denny has backed me my whole entire career, and I do appreciate that. But it's losing your peers, the men that taught me how to be a firefighter, not being around. It's harder to come than it was back then because they're gone. Dave Mott happened to be kind of my mentor. I used to spend some time with Dave, and he was a very knowledgeable person, and he had lots of good stories and lots of good tips on how to stay safe. I would say the other downside to being a firefighter is the trainings gets harder and harder every year to be a firefighter. The time restraints get harder and harder every year to be a volunteer firefighter. And then you go on those calls where you can't help. You can't save that house, or you can't save that person. And we are programmed to save, protect property. So every one of us feels a loss when we can't accomplish that goal. There's nothing you can do. You just have to live on and move on to the next day. But that's difficult for a firefighter to do. I know everybody would agree with me on that. Overall, some of the best people I've ever known in my life I've geared up with in this firehouse here. Being an instructor and being in the business and working for the city, I've been to many, many fire departments in our area and outside. And I truly would put West Milton's fire department from years past till now up against career and volunteer fire departments all around. I'm just fortunate enough to have had this experience. I guess I will close by saying that, we shared stories. If a firefighter tells you that they've never been scared, they're either lying or they've never done anything to be scared about. I think probably the time that I was most scared, I was with the gentleman to my left. When Mr. Deals went up, it got quite a bit of a head start on us. We did not realize that it was a fully involved structure fire until we pulled into our parking lot and couldn't even find our parking stalls. So our task was we split up into smaller groups, which we were trained to do, and Firefighter Lakes and myself, our task was to go in through the front door and make our way to the fire. And when we got back to about the meat department where it used to be, which we're all familiar with Mr. Deals, how it is now and how it was then, we realized that we weren't looking for the fire, that the fire was looking for us. We had fire left, right, above, and I was afraid at that point, after doing a tactic we call penciling, which is shooting water into the air and behind us, that we were surrounded. And we had, as Todd mentioned, things exploding all around us. And Todd didn't know it at the time, but I had taken my life safety rope and tethered Todd, because it was that kind of situation where if we would have become apart, we would have never found each other. So I guess that's one example of when I was truly fearful. We did report fire conditions, and we exited quickly while we still had an exit. So that was probably one of my most scariest moments. So that's pretty much it for what I have.
Tell us about the fire conventions that we used to have.
Well, our fire department started back in 1931, and my mother was carrying me at the time. It was like the 1st of June, and I was born June the 26th, so. But our department, they had the Northwestern Association, which we was a member of and still are, was like above Salina on north, up around Toledo and Cleveland. And our guys down here, Ed J. and Cheeseman from Covington Fire Department, they thought that we ought to have an organization here in the Central Western part of the state. So they organized, and that was one way. Once a year we had water ball. Well, we didn't have water ball back then. We had 2.5-inch hose lines, and the teams were like 3 guys on a team, and you pick out the 2 biggest guys, and they was the shields, and then the team that knocked the other team down, rolled them down the street, was the winners. And but when we started breaking hips and legs and arms, then we thought, well, we got to do something different. In fact, one year at Covington, I seen a guy's eyeball laying out on his cheek. Because you get hit with a 2.5-inch line, it had a lot of power. But the trick was, to get them below the knees, and then they just, their legs would go out from under them, and then you could just roll them down the street. And but that got to be too dangerous. So now we put a ball on a cable, and one team will try to keep the ball in the other team's part of the thing. We got a pension fund or a death benefit fund now that I had the privilege to start. I thought, well, they had it up north, but they didn't include squads and your paramedics and that part. And I thought, well, we go on more runs on squad duty than was you one of the first ones, Clarence, that took the?
Yeah.
Bruce and Clarence and I, and I think one of the McCarrolls,
Yeah, Bobby.
Bobby McCarroll. Who was the other one? There was 5 of us from our department that went over to Troy to,
John Thompson and Bob Hensley.
oh, okay. But anyway, we was a nucleus of starting our squad duty here in town. And we bought a squad, and I think the first run I went on, Jim Sarver was driving, and I thought, well, they said there was a young boy playing hooky from school, and him and his buddy was horsing around, and this kid got shot in the stomach. And I thought, oh, God. And it was my son and I and Jim Sarver. And I thought, well, Jim's used to seeing blood and guts, but he didn't even go in the house. I went up on the front porch, and the sheriff said, I've chalked around the body, take him and go. So we put him on a stretcher and bag-masked him all the way to the hospital. But I thought he got shot, he's going to be in the stomach. But it just, when I lifted his shirt and looked, it just looked like somebody blowed a bubble from bubble gum and laid it on his stomach. And that was, there wasn't any blood or anything. But he died. But, and then after that, I was talking about Central Western. It was a way for each department to kind of pass on. We didn't, have television back then and everything, so you didn't know what your neighbors was doing. And that was one time a year when we all got together in conference and could talk about the way we solved some problems, and other departments would tell us what they was doing and what kind of equipment they had, and it was a way to learn and grow. And used to be that it was a big thing because every department would try to get their high school band to go, and we had competition and passed out trophies and everything. West Milton was always, I think we had the convention here about 5 times, but I know we had the most queen contestants. One year we had 33 contestants, where now we only have 5 to 10, and we try to participate every year and all that. But
So where are they held?
well, let's see. Verona had the last 2,
Okay.
so it's dropped down. In Salina, let's see, next year it's going to be in, I know Salina asked for it, but what's over around Urbana?
Mechanicsburg?
Mechanicsburg is where it's going to be next year. But some other large fires that I was on was Brown's Grocery. It was the corner of North Street and Miami. And at one time there was like 3 or 4 different buildings built and had individual roofs. Well, then over a period of time, they put one roof over the top of all those buildings, and we'd chop a hole in the roof and think we were going to get water on the fire, but all we was doing was throwing it on another roof below. So that building, I can remember it was so smoky you couldn't see, and I was up on this ladder, and every time I'd open up the nozzle full blast, my ladder would start going back, and then I'd leave up on it and go back into the building. And I wanted the guy to cut the pressure on the line, but with all the noise of all the fire trucks and everything running with their motors wide open, you couldn't hear a darn thing. So I'd have to keep opening up the nozzle and then shutting it down. And Wendell Hall, I remember he come up to the bottom of the ladder and he said, "Bill, I hate to tell you this, but I drive race cars, and there's a couple jugs of nitro up there in my room. I thought, oh, God. But that was a bad fire. We was on that for several hours, like maybe 8 or 10. But anyway, but like I said, the old lumberyard building, when it burned, it was cold that night, and you had to. I know I stepped off the back of the truck and landed on my butt right on the road, and we went over to Eddie Buckingham's garage, and he had that, like somebody said before, we had to stand in there until the ice would melt off our latches on our coats before we could open up and get out of them. But I can't think of anything else. We used to have a truck we got from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was called a Biederman, and it would go, when we had the big snow, it was the only thing that would move around in town, and we made a big wedge and pulled it behind and go around to all the fire hydrants and clear around them, so that if we had a fire, we could get around town and be able to but that was hard work, shoveling all that snow, because it was up to our armpits in spots. My mother was a telephone operator, and back when I first got on, all the phones in town, all the firemen had red lights on, so if they'd pick up, they got first service, and everybody else's was a white light on the. And when a fire call would come in, well, they'd just turn around and pull the handle on the siren and set it off. But there was a time when the city didn't want us to use their siren, so Von Arnold was our chief, and he lived out on Hamilton Street, corner of Hamilton and Poplar, and he would come down the street with his exhaust whistle on, and by the village being smaller then, well, just about everybody could hear that lived in town. And there was quite a period of time that we didn't take anybody on that if they moved out of town, well, they had to drop off the department. But with our radios and the way we can notify firemen now, we can take them on if they live out on Range Line or Calumet Road or wherever. And so with the communications like they are today, and we got that all call on phones now too, which makes it real nice for special meetings or to remind us of something. But
Tell us what you do with the waffle money.
Well, what we do with the waffle money is we try to buy new gear or new tools, anything to supplement our income that we get. That's pretty much it for that. I mean, it just goes into our general fund.
Okay. Denny, how long was your dad the chief?
12 years maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, he started in '74.
Who else was the chief that we haven't mentioned?
Fred Anderson, Eddie J.
Ed J.
Roger.
Yeah, Roger was
Roger
chief for a
Hurley
year.
was for a year and a half or something. Year. But,
How long have you been on, Bill?
this makes my 60th year.
Good for you. Good for you.
If I could count them years when I was 8 years old, you know.
What else do you have to tell us? You have more stories?
I don't have a story, but we're talking about how West Milton is, ahead. We do have a dive team. We have 2 boats. What do we got, about 6, 7 divers? And in the Miami Valley, there's maybe, I know Piqua has a dive team, West Milton, and that's about it for the Miami Valley area. So,
Maybe
you know,
Box
we're,
21 might.
well, I don't even know if they, but,
I don't think
you
they
know,
do anymore.
we're,
Don't they?
you know, when people find out that a little volunteer fire department has a dive team and the equipment we have, I know there's a lot of paid departments that when they hear West Milton, they recognize what kind of quality guys and equipment West Milton has, because you'll get some of the paid guys come in and look at our equipment and they can't believe what we have compared to what a paid department has. You know, we're right up there. Several times, yeah.
Silver Ridge, down over the Ohio River. We was called down there for help for search and rescue.
And we went to the Xenia tornado.
Yeah, we got called to Inglewood for the dive team when the Trotwood police officer ran off the road right there on Taywood. We were down there for several hours with our dive team trying to locate him, and I've been to numerous state parks and been to Dayton. Dayton's called us in for dive, and so it's
Several times a year.
So if you are all volunteers and you work during the day, if you have a fire during the day, what happens? Are there enough people that can do it?
Well, we're fortunate. We have actually, just with our street department, we have Lieutenant Adams, we have Lieutenant Levy, who's on our street department. Jim Wilson, he's one of our firefighters. He works with our water department. And myself, plus we can always pick up 2 or 3. So there's really a day that doesn't go by that we can't get an engine and usually a second piece of equipment out. I know that we cover, we help our smaller departments in our township during the daytime. They're not as fortunate to have that availability, so we've always lended a hand to them whenever needed. So it's we're pretty much covered 24/7. Luckily, that's never been a problem. And something when we were talking about expertise, I'm not a member of the dive team, but one of my fortes since I've been on was rescue. And when I got on the department, we had a mini pumper that had our rescue equipment on it, which would have been people call the jaws of life and the cutters. Since then, we've evolved to one of probably the premier rescues I know in the region. There's not a lot of departments that have a true dedicated heavy rescue. The city of Dayton has a true dedicated heavy rescue. There's not a lot of other areas that do. You can classify our heavy rescue because of the amount of weight it can lift and the equipment that we carry on it. There's not really a situation that we could envision as far as from vehicle accidents to entrapments of any type to lifting to prying that we don't have on our rescue. So that's something else that we're pretty proud of. Area departments won't hesitate to call us if they needed additional resources for rescue. So that's something else that I think we're pretty proud of as a department.
So what other levels besides chief? How many other levels are there?
I didn't hear what she said.
Basically, our line officers on down.
Chief
Yeah,
and assistant chief.
Chief, assistant chief, captain, and 3 lieutenants.
Okay.
And then we got secretary, treasurer, and trustees that are all voted on.
Have you ever had a woman volunteer?
We've had some applications, but that's about as far as it's gotten.
Okay.
We've never had one on the department itself.
I know Laura's had one. We're mutual aid with Laura and Ludlow, and probably our township is probably one of the best fire-protected townships in the state of Ohio because of our department and Laura and Ludlow. And but I know it seemed like one year we lost. Our department's been a good place to train, and if you're smart, you get on a paid department. So when you get to 30 years in, you can retire. But I wasn't that smart. We had people like, one year we lost Paulus and Brent Mays was both paramedics and firefighters, and they went to Kettering. And Hemrick went to Dayton, Tim Hemrick, and
Myron Woolley went to Troy.
yeah, those two went over to Troy.
Guthrie,
Yeah,
Greenville.
Bob Guthrie, he went to Greenville.
Yeah, Bob Guthrie went to Greenville, and he's retired from Greenville now. But
All of them retired.
Pretty much all of them's
Yeah.
retired. We're still here.
yeah,
But you all get to keep on serving.
well, yeah, we get paid for meetings and training sessions, and I don't know if do we get minimum wage now or?
Brown there.
I think we're right around minimum wage.
But the only ones that gets paid is the chief and assistant chief, and that's for a lot of paperwork. Well, the secretary and treasurer gets paid, but it's minute. But I know when I was working at White Baking Company, Roger Stapleton said, "I'm going to buy a new TV and get my wife a new stove for Christmas." And I said, he said, "What you going to do with your pay?" And I said, "Well, you can't hardly do much with less than $100. I think back then we wasn't getting only a couple dollars for every fire run and whatever. But it has picked up a little bit, but not with the wages and everything else. But
What else? What else do you have?
Our water plant, when our water plant closed down, a lot of our guys on total volunteer, their time, actually they're in the process of converting it to a full-fledged training center. Right now, it's one side of it's actually a working house / apartment. One side of it's dedicated for like high-angle rescue, rappelling. I'd say it's about, 60% done.
Pretty close, I'd say.
We've been training in there often. We have basically a firefighter Mayday, what we call Mayday or saving your own type maze set up that we went through, last month, which was quite grueling, especially as you get older. Your bumps and bruises from past start catching up to you as you get older. But yeah, it was really good training. So we've tried to do as much as we can on our own, and that really is, to me, what makes a good department. When you've got guys that'll go up there and spend Saturday and Sunday of their own time away from their families to do these things. If we would have to hire this stuff out, I mean, the cost would be incredible. So we've taken a building that was just a shell and basically built what's becoming a fairly state-of-the-art training center on our own. So we should be pretty proud of that.
What do you see for the future of the fire department right here? As far
Future.
as building, then we have something to build.
That's a lot of fun, too.
Yes, it is.
I know the city's looked into an addition for the police or remodeling, and then the fire department would be involved in that, but I don't know how far that one's got so far, but I know it was talked about. But the addition that is on the back of the firehouse, the firemen themselves built and paid for that addition on the back of the station. And we did all of the labor on it, building it. I know there was several firemen that almost ended up divorces over that building because of the time we spent down here. But I mean, you got a job to do. All you got to do is just ask, and these guys are there to do it. I mean, it's like Ben said, the training center. There's no way we'd have had the funds to pay somebody to do what they do up there, and I watched the last training that Ben was talking about, and maybe when I was Ben's age, I might have been able to do it. I don't even know if I could have done it then, but these guys went through some really good training up there, and Bill?
One other thing before we, at least we forget, I think we should say thank you to the citizens of West Milton and Union Township for all their support. And I don't mean just waffles. I mean, people come in for those waffles to help us out. I mean, it's just amazing the support that the community has given us. And whenever we have a levy come up on the tax ballots and stuff, we've always been supported by the community. And basically, I think it's the community of West Milton and Union Township should, take a lot of the credit for us being, as good as we are. I mean, we wouldn't have the equipment without their support, the training without their support. It's the citizens of West Milton should be proud of what they've accomplished in this fire department. It's a model for the region, the state. Thank you. Thank you very much for all you've done for us over the years and everything.
Anybody else have anything to add? I think it's a mutual admiration that that we have. We appreciate you, and I'm glad that you appreciate the people of Union Township. And I thank you very much for this wonderful evening, and I thank you for your service. It's been most interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.